Hello, and welcome to this episode of Felonious, a podcast where we discuss the realm of true crime. From chilling cold cases to the wild and wacky, we'll explore it all with a perfect blend of seriousness and humour. My name is Emma.
And I'm Nazia. To keep up to date with what's coming up, be sure to follow us on Instagram at felonious.pod and visit our website feloniouspod.com. We hope you enjoy this episode, so let's get to it. We're back.
Yeah, we're back, guys. It's been a
long time. Yeah. And I know a couple of our listeners have been asking, what's happened with the podcast? And we've had a couple of new followers. So, yeah, thank you for your patience and thank you for following us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, we've just had a lot going on.
Yeah. You know, life got in the way. Who knew?
I know, right? So, yeah, we're going to do things a bit differently this time round. We will explain at the end, but the first thing to mention is we're not going to do any banter, and we'll cover that at the end of this episode. So we're just going to jump right in, I guess.
Yeah, dive into the deep end.
Yeah, and what a deep end it is. We're going to kick things off with a really, really horrible case. And in today's episode, we are going to be exploring the horrendous crimes of Michel Fourniret and Monique Olivier. They are also known as l'orgue. This is my bad French, sorry, it has not improved, even though it's been quite some time. I've been a hermit, so I haven't spoken any French. Also known as l'orgue and l'orgues of the Ardennes.
So I mean monster and monstrous.
Yeah, so ogre and basically bad Shrek and bad Mrs. Shrek.
Yeah.
Evil Shrek. The Michel Fourniret, he is known as the most prolific serial killer in France. He abducted, raped and murdered more than 10 young girls and women in France and Belgium between 1987 and 2003. With the help of his accomplice and wife, who turned out to be the most hated woman in France, Monique. So this episode will focus on the crimes that the couple committed, and there will be a part 2, which will take a look at how they were caught and their trials. Yeah, this episode's going to be dark. There's going to be mention of incest, discussions around sex and the use of drugs. There's going to be a lot of discussions around sexual abuse, rape, and murder. And it's been informed by a few sources. So there was a documentary that was released in 2008. It was a Journeyman documentary, which is simply titled Fourniret. In 2015 on British TV, there was an episode on Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer, which focused on the couple. And more recently, in 2023, there was a documentary on Netflix which follows Monique Olivier, and it's called Monique Olivier, Accessory to Evil. And we've also got some information from various news articles. So I'll let Emma kick things off.
Yeah, thanks for that. Get ready to hear my awful French. Michel Fourniret was born on the 4th of April in 1942 in Sedan.
Yeah.
In the Ardennes.
Ardennes,
I started already.
That's all right.
Apparently, his grandmother became pregnant with a Belgian forest worker and therefore gave birth to his mother illegitimately. Michel claimed to have been sexually abused by his mother when he was just a child. And sexual abuse by a mother is rare, but it has happened. And, not everyone who is sexually abused in general goes on to be a sex offender and a murderer.
Yeah. And this is just something that Michel has claimed. There's no, not to say that it didn't happen, but there is no evidence. So it's just his word, basically.
Yeah. At age 12, Michel apparently had a delusional episode where he was out on his bike and he saw the Blessed Virgin and then collapsed in a field in a state of ecstasy. Michel grew up with a brother and sister. He often complained of hearing his sister use a bucket as a toilet and felt it was unbecoming for a woman. He was repulsed by the act. He grew obsessed with the idea of a woman as a virgin and of perfection, pure like the Virgin Mary. He later told investigators that his only regret in life was that he never married a virgin. In 1962, Michel married a woman named Annette. 2 years later, they had their son, Jean-Christophe. Annette described him as being endearing, but also introverted. The latter she put down to his time serving in the Algerian War. They divorced in 1966. In 1967, Michel was sentenced to a suspended prison term for the first time for assaulting minors. In 1969, he married another woman called Nicole. They had 3 children together, a son, Nicolas, and twin daughters, Anna and Marie-Hélène. Nicolas later died in a work accident in 1995. Marie-Hélène died by suicide in 2006, as she was unable to bear her father's name after the crimes he had committed. Michel was convicted several times more for voyeurism and violence until 1973 in Nantes and Verdun. On the 4th of September 1982, Dahina Sierra-Gueno, 14 years old, was returning home after a day out with her brother and boyfriend. Michel followed her before grabbing her arm and threatened her with a bottle, which he said contained sulfuric acid. He told her that he had a stolen vehicle and the police were after him, so he was going to take her hostage. Once they were in the car, he tried to talk to her, telling her how he had a Catholic upbringing and was a virgin when he got married. However, on his wedding day, he found out his wife was not a virgin. He told Dahina that he was going to simulate rape. He tied her up and actually did rape her. However, he was unable to penetrate her fully due to premature ejaculation. He then manipulated Dahina and convinced her not to go to the police, because what he did wasn't bad enough to press charges, and she would otherwise destroy everything he had built up in his life, such as family and work. Do we know what he did for a career?
He had different careers. I think later on we find out what his work was at the time of the later crimes, but I'm not sure what he worked as during this period.
2 years later, he was arrested for 17 paedophile offences, and Dahina had to testify in court. The fact that he didn't fully penetrate her was an issue, because they couldn't determine whether he had actually raped her. Still sexual abuse.
Yeah, and I think at that time, this was the early 1980s, so perceptions and laws around rape were different.
Yeah, if you didn't have the evidence for it, it didn't happen, basically.
Yeah.
Also, because she showed compassion for him and didn't have any scars or wounds, his offence on her was classed as indecent assault rather than rape. As a result, he escaped a longer prison sentence and subsequent follow-up. In 1984, Michel was incarcerated for 10 assaults and rapes on minors. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, 2 of which were suspended, a sentence followed by 3 years of probation. Following one of his arrests in 1984, he and Nicole divorced. Michel kept a notebook keeping a record of all of his assaults, including the date, the type of offence, as well as other details. In 1987, while incarcerated in Fleury-Mérogis at the time, he put an ad in a Christian magazine asking for a woman to communicate and develop a relationship with him because he was a lonely prisoner. The ad read, "Prisoner seeking to correspond with someone of any age to forget loneliness." Monique Olivier responded to the ad.
So, let's look at Monique Olivier. Monique was born on the 31st of October in 1948 in Indre-et-Loire. In the Netflix documentary, an old friend explained how she knew Monique in the 1970s. She said how she became sad and depressed and seemed afraid of her husband, Andre, at the time. Monique and Andre had been together for about 10 years and had 2 children. Andre described her as an extraordinary woman and as one who didn't make decisions. Monique alleged that her ex-husband became more possessive and aggressive after becoming a painter. He thought she was having affairs. He would be violent with her, kicking her, hitting her with a belt, and holding her head underwater in the bath. She also claimed that her first husband pimped her. However, there was no evidence of this abuse apart from her account of the relationship, which her ex-husband denies. She also left their children in the custody of her husband. And I mean, while this could be true, it's not the first time we've known a woman to leave her children with the abusive husband, like in Fred West's case, his first, I can't remember her name now, Kathy?
Yeah.
So his first wife left their children with him, and she did later try to get them back, but she was murdered.
We spoke about that in the neurology episode, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Back in season 1.
Yes. So Monique and Michel developed relationship after she responded to his ad. At the time that they started writing to each other, Michel was 45 years old and Monique was 38. While Michel was in prison, he and Monique exchanged intense and passionate letters. Over a 10-month period until he was released in October 1987, he had sent Monique 133 letters and she had sent him 84. In the letters exchanged between them, it is clear that Monique had a fear of loneliness and abandonment, and Michel understood her vulnerability. He gave her the feeling that he would be there for her and that he wanted to avenge her and help reunite her with her children. On the 16th of June 1987, while Michel was still in prison, and after 4 months of correspondence, he asked Monique to marry him. On the 19th of June, she replied and accepted his proposal despite knowing why he was in prison. He wrote in his letters that his whole life had been spent stealing, raping, and lying.
If he wrote that in his letters, surely alarm bells would be ringing.
Yeah, and in I can't remember which documentary it was, I think it was the Netflix one, they question, like, what was her attraction to him? Could it be that she had such a severe case of low self-esteem and fear of loneliness? I mean, it's got to be pretty low if that's what you're accepting.
Yeah.
Or was it some disturbing attraction to someone that was dangerous? Who knows? Michel wrote in one letter that he would make them, her ex-husbands, atone for their crimes.
Sorry, just to go back to that, isn't that like kind of confessing?
I mean, he's already in prison for it. At this point, he hasn't murdered anyone. He's raped and committed other crimes, which he is convicted for.
Right.
But yeah, he's openly telling her that he has raped other women. I don't know if he's admitted that he's raped children. That wasn't made clear. Not that it makes a difference. Yeah, I don't really want to know what he's written to her, to be honest. So yeah, he wrote in one letter that he would make them, her ex-husbands, atone for their crimes and that he will kill the ex-husband. In return, he wanted Monique to help him find this clears up the letters. He wanted Monique to help him find young women, particularly virgins, to abuse. He revealed to her that he never received the gift of virginity. He wrote, "I'm afraid that the demon of this frustration will take advantage to drive me to find and finally possess it, whatever the cost." Which doesn't make sense because he's telling her that he's willing to murder someone if she does this for him.
Right. And he's in prison, right? Well, he writes this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's in prison for already raping someone, but apparently he hasn't raped a virgin.
So the police can't be looking at the letters. Like, they can't be screening like they do now.
Yeah, I guess not. I wonder if then at that point, she even took him seriously, or she was just so happy
to have attention.
This attention and this really messed up hero complex.
Yeah.
Like, I will get revenge for you on your husband.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe she thought, oh yeah, I'll go along with it, just as long as you kill my ex.
Yeah, even if he never does, but even if he was never going to kill her husband and she deep down knew it, it's just that attention she's getting that it's not even protection. I don't know. So he would describe his victims. Sorry, this is going to be really disgusting. He would describe his victims to Monique as membranes on legs and refer to his penis as his rainbow, which would pierce a membrane. In one twisted correspondence, he wrote, "This damn membrane, I want it. When my penis has pierced a virgin's womb, I will be a man like any other, and nothing will be able to shake my fidelity to an incredible woman called Monique." She agreed to enter into this pact with him. She agreed to find him a virgin, and he agreed that he would kill her ex-husband, but that they needed to get hold of money. And in the Netflix documentary, one of the psychological experts stated that, quite rightly, most women would have disagreed to this pact on the basis of basic morality, but Monique obviously didn't. And let's not forget, they haven't even physically met each other yet.
Yeah.
This is all through letters. This isn't even through like Tinder. This is through letters.
It's back in the day before...
Yeah, before the internet. So in October 1987, Michel was released from prison after 3 years and 6 months. He moved in with Monique in Saint-Cyr-le-Colomb. Sorry, French speakers, if I've butchered that. He should have been monitored, and local police should have been informed that a criminal, a sex offender, had been released, but none of this happened. And I think it's important to note at this point in time, there was no sex offenders register or like a national sex offenders register. The local police should have been known about this. But again, this is the 1980s.
And if he was released on probation as well, he wouldn't have had a tag, because I'm guessing they didn't do that then either.
Well, he should have been followed up, but
Yeah.
It didn't happen. Yeah.
So on the 11th of December in 1987, 17-year-old Isabelle Laville was walking home from college when Michel noticed her and identified her route. He then instructed Monique to approach her in the van and gain her trust, while he waited a few kilometres down the road pretending to need to hitchhike as he ran out of gas. Instead of going to the police station then and there, or disobeying Michel's instructions, Monique drove up to Isabelle and offered her a lift. She then picked up Michel on the way. After some conversation, Monique then made Isabelle swallow Rohypnol, which had been kept in the glove compartment. The couple took Isabelle back to their home in Saint-Cyr-le-Colomb and took her into their bedroom. Michel was unable to get an erection, so Monique performed oral sex on him, which then allowed him to rape Isabelle. When later asked by psychology experts how she could do something so awful, Monique couldn't give an answer. There was no sense of guilt. She would speak about the victims as if they were objects, and would say phrases such as, "Losing your virginity doesn't kill you," or "rape doesn't kill you." So messed up.
Yeah.
It's like she detached herself from the whole situation.
Yeah.
And didn't want to admit to what she had done.
Yeah, and in part 2, when we talk about the trial, we will describe what her behaviour was like.
Until this crime, Michel had never killed any of his victims before. Once he started committing his crimes with Monique, the murders started. This also took place less than 2 months after he was released from prison. That night, Isabelle's parents pulled out their sofa bed and left the light on. They were unable to sleep, and they kept checking the door every time they heard a noise. Police initially suspect French serial killer Émile Louis, as he was operating in the same area that Isabelle went missing. This was unfortunate for the police and the residents, as there was another set of abductions and murders happening at the same time in the same region. Do you think Michel kept up to date with what other criminals were doing, and so he chose locations so that what he did could be hidden or mistaken to be the crimes of other killers?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because he did cover quite a wide geographical area with his victims. Yeah, I have no idea. But I was thinking he probably started murdering then because maybe in the past, because it was just him committing the crimes, he didn't have the confidence to go through with actually murdering. Whereas now that he had Monique, he probably felt more empowered to then actually murder his victims.
Yeah, right.
That's just my train of thought, but who knows?
As time went on, Isabelle's family realised they would never find her. It would be 17 years before they found out what had happened to her. Isabelle's mother blames Monique, as without her, Michel would not have been able to commit his crimes. She also says it was that vile woman who brought children into the world, but didn't respect other people's children. Isabelle's sister said in the Netflix documentary that she would always pick her sister up when she finished late from college, but she didn't that day. clearly carrying the guilt that she was unable to protect her sister.
So while Michel was in prison, he befriended a fellow prisoner called Jean-Pierre Elgouache. Elgouache was sentenced to death in Spain. He was involved with Basque terrorists. He was a robber and a major drug trafficker. Even though sex offenders were amongst the most unliked in prison, Elgouache, for whatever reason, befriended Michel. Michel heard from him that there was a stash of gold coins hidden in a cemetery in Val d'Oise, which is where I live, by the way. Not anywhere near this cemetery, but the department that I live in is this department. So they were the proceeds of bank robberies belonging to the Gang de Postiche, which is the Whig gang, who were a team of bank robbers that operated in Paris in the early 1980s. Elgouache was worried the hoard would disappear while he was still serving his sentence, so he told his wife, Farida Amish. Monique developed a friendship with Farida. Jean-Pierre suggested to his wife to ask Michel for help in getting the hoard. They spent days searching the area and managed to find the hoard, several dozen kilos of gold, gold bullion, and gold coins, but it was hard to sell. According to the Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer episode, it took 2 years for Michel and Farida to find a buyer in Brussels. They sold the gold for 1.2 million francs, which was the currency at the time. Michel and Monique then bought a castle, Château du Sautou, in the Ardennes, the north of France on the Belgian border. They stayed in regular contact with Farida as they had her share of the money. They arranged a meeting deep in the Ardennes forest. Later in court, Monique alleged that Michel was sat in the back of the car with Farida and wrapped a shoelace around her neck. A knife fell from Michel's pocket, which Monique then handed to him, and he proceeded to kill Farida. Monique then visited Elgouache in prison to say that Farida had disappeared and implied that she ran away with the loot. She cried to Elgouache and he was fooled into thinking that she was telling the truth. He then ended up back in prison for a separate crime while Michel blended into society. He found out that Michel owned a chateau which he had bought with the 1.2 million francs and realised he had taken the loot and killed Farida. He wrote to the courts to say that he suspected Michel was involved in his wife's disappearance, but this was received with little attention due to him being an ex-convict. The disappearance of Farida was never pursued, her body remains undiscovered, and Michel and Monique were able to continue to live off of the Whig gang's loot and commit their crimes. There are some reports that say Michel was on his own when he killed Farida in 1988, but who knows? It's both of their words. The police never pursued this disappearance, and we'll never know. So at that time, Michel worked as a handyman, an electrician, and a forest ranger, and appeared normal. Monique was at this point doing anything for him, despite him not fulfilling his end of the bargain of murdering her ex-husband. He appeared to have full control of her. For example, when they attended dinner parties, she would only speak when he gave her permission to. Monique then became pregnant with their child. And now that she was pregnant, she wanted a father for her child, so she continued to do whatever Michel pleased.
So she already had kids with her ex, didn't she? And he had custody.
Yeah, so her ex-husband...
He had them.
Yeah.
This case isn't discussed in any of the documentaries, and it's about a 19-year-old Marie-Angèle Domès, who disappeared on the 8th of July in 1988. While she was on her way to Auxerre station to spend the weekend with her host family. Marie-Angèle was living in a children's home at the time. She had 4 older siblings who were all placed in foster families. They only learnt of Marie-Angèle's existence a couple of years before her disappearance, when she was 17 or 18 years old. A judicial investigation was opened immediately, but was dismissed in February 1989. But the case was then reopened in 2002, and despite several efforts, her body was never found. Michel confessed to this crime in 2008, but Monique denounced the crime twice, then later retracted her statement. During Monique's trial in 2023, a witness who was from the same foster home as Marie-Angèle recalled how she had been approached by Michel and Monique in December 1987. She later recognised Michel from photos from his arrest in 2003. Out of distrust for the justice system, because her own experience of rape was ignored, she didn't say anything at the time. During the trial, she asked for forgiveness from the family for her silence. On the 3rd of August 1988, Michel followed 20-year-old Fabienne Leroy in a supermarket. He let her walk outside before driving his car past the exit. Monique was with him at the time, and she was 8 months pregnant. They asked Fabienne if they knew the address of a doctor as Monique was ill. Fabienne agreed to get in the car to help them, before Monique held a gun to her head as Michel tied her hands. They then drove for 2 hours. Fabienne's body was found at the Montmelon-le-Grand army base the next day. Needle marks were found on her arm. Michel later claimed he tried to kill her by injecting air into her veins to cause a pulmonary embolism, but it didn't work, so he murdered her with his sawn-off shotgun. On the 9th of September 1988, Monique gave birth to their son Salim.
Yeah, Salim.
9 months after the murder of Isabelle Laville. Alain Barre, the lawyer for the Laville family, described Isabelle's death as a human sacrifice. She was killed in order for Salim to be born. Gérard Chemla, lawyer for the Tumpong family, reiterated this point by suggesting they celebrated the first murder by conceiving Salim, and comments, "Imagine the context of their son's life. It's an abomination."
Yeah, so there's a Tumpong family that she's a later victim that we'll cover. But yeah, could you imagine being born into this world in the midst of all that?
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
And what if you remember some of those things that happened?
Yeah, in your early childhood. Yeah.
Messed up.
Yeah. So in January 1989, on a train from Paris to Charleville-Mézières, Michel met and chatted with 22-year-old Jean-Marie, talking about religion and telling her about his family. During the journey, Michel offered her a lift from the station and offered her a babysitting job. They were met by Monique at the station. Jean-Marie told the couple that she was expected by friends, but asked to meet with the couple the following day, which they agreed to. Monique offered her a lift, which she declined. She was at the time living in a religious establishment and told the nuns there that she had met a very nice man who was going to introduce her to his wife. She returned to meet the couple the next day. So when they met, they spent time with Salim and enjoyed some cake together before they took her back home. So on this occasion, nothing happened. Then the second time they met, on the 18th of March, Jean-Marie was offered coffee while they relaxed on the sofa, and the coffee was laced with tranquilizers. Michel asked her if she was a virgin. Shocked by the question, she told him that she had a boyfriend and requested to leave. Michel was then angry that she wasn't a virgin, which led to a fight and struggle as Jean-Marie tried to escape. In the Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer documentary, they say that she was subdued by Michel, raped and then strangled, with Monique watching and their baby sleeping in the crib. However, in the Netflix documentary, it is said that Monique actively helped Michel subdue, strangle and kill Jean-Marie. They put her body in the freezer and after a few days buried her in the grounds of the chateau. In the Journeyman documentary, it is believed that he kept her body in a bath or a shower. Either way, who knows?
Either way, it's sick.
It's really fucked up, and ultimately she ended up in the grounds somewhere around the castle. Having not heard from her for days, Jean-Marie's friends reported her missing. Police again suspected the perpetrator, Émile Louis. Her family thought it was Marc Dutroux, another serial killer, who was committing crimes at the same time in Belgium. He was later convicted of murdering 6 girls. Michel and Monique then left the country to continue their crimes, to Belgium where Marc Dutroux was active. Their second home was in Sarthe-Custine, a small village with only 150 inhabitants. Then on the 28th of July, 1989, Michel and Monique got married.
Michel and Monique spotted 12-year-old Elisabeth Brichet in Namur in Belgium. She lived with her mother and had a friend who lived 400 metres from their home. She would often go to this friend's house in the afternoon and then return home in the evening. Michel and Monique saw her go to this friend's house and followed her. They parked opposite the house and waited for her while she played there for 3 hours. Baby Salim was in the car with them, who was crying from hunger. When Elizabeth eventually came out of her friend's house, Monique approached her with her baby, pretending that he was sick. She asked Elizabeth for help because she needed to find a doctor. Elizabeth was then raped by Michel. She was killed at the chateau and buried on the grounds. Cédric Vizat de Became, former prosecutor, said her case took up 15 years of his career. It was a case they were determined not to give up on. The case lasted from 1989 until 2004, when Monique finally confessed as to what happened to Elizabeth.
I mean, this is so horrible in itself, but the fact that they waited for 3 hours in a car with a baby.
Yeah, it's sick and twisted.
I mean, if you cut out everything else, being in a car for 3 hours with a crying baby, I would say that's child abuse.
Yeah.
No, neglect. Okay, maybe not abuse, neglect. It's just, yeah.
Definitely not a normal mother behaviour.
No, absolutely not.
20-year-old Joanna Parish from Gloucestershire in England had taken a year out from Leeds University to teach English in France. In Auxerre, she put an ad in a local newspaper offering English lessons to children, and on the 16th of May 1990, she was seen in a busy square in the middle of Auxerre where she had arranged to meet someone who had responded to her ad. She then disappeared. The next day, her naked and bound body was found floating in the Yonne River. The autopsy found sperm which indicated she had been raped. During her confessions between 2004 and 2008, Monique explained how the van was parked on the riverbank, where Michel carried out the attack as she sat in the front, listening and doing nothing. According to her confession, Joanna refused to get undressed, so Michel beat her unconscious before raping and strangling her. Bernard Kinsella, Detective Chief Superintendent from the UK, was asked to assist with inquiries at the time of Joanna's murder, recalled how there were no appeals for witnesses made in the media. He felt as though very little was being done by the French police. There were young girls who were disappearing from the area after Michel, who was a known sex offender, had been released from prison, but there was no inquiry or investigation. On the 21st of November 1990, Michel and Monique saw Natasha Denez shopping with her mother. She separated from her mother for a few moments. Monique slowed down their vehicle and asked for the girls' help while feigning illness. Michel then threw Natasha in the back of the van, where she was raped and strangled. Her body was buried at a beach in Nantes and discovered 3 days later. Police believed her neighbour Jean Gras to be the suspect. He was part of a far-left terrorist organisation, and police believed he murdered Natasha because she found this out. He was arrested and later died by suicide in prison, unable to bear being accused of murder, but police may have seen this as confirmation of his guilt.
Which then would have stopped them from pursuing other leads and finding out who the real murderer was.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the 16th of May 2000, Michel drove across the Franco-Belgian border alone to Charleville-Mézières. Céline Saison, 18 years old, was going home from school. Michel told her he was lost and asked her to accompany him. As soon as she got into his vehicle, he locked the doors. He told her to have sex with him, otherwise he would throw acid in her face. She was raped and strangled. Michel returned to the couple's rented home in Belgium. He emptied Celine's school bag on the kitchen counter and told Monique, "I went hunting, I got satisfaction." On the 17th of May 2000, Daniel Bugard, chief of police from... Right, I'm going to try and pronounce this the French way. Because my partner's from this region.
Oh no.
And I never get it right.
There's pressure.
Yeah. The chief of police from Reims, or Reims, the English way of saying it, regional crime squad got a phone call from a police officer who said his niece, Céline Saison, had disappeared. He told Bugard that the police station thought she had run away, but he knew his niece and asked him to look into it. They looked into the disappearance but couldn't find anything until the 22nd of July, when her body was discovered in Belgium just across the border. On the 5th of May 2001, Mananya Tumpong went to the Mediathek, so it's like a library, in Sedan, which was Michel's hometown, while her mother and stepfather went grocery shopping. She was supposed to be home by 5 p.m, but when she still hadn't returned by 5:30 p.m, her mother sensed something was wrong. She went out with a photo asking if anyone had seen her daughter. Mananya was stalked by Michel. He persuaded her to get into his vehicle and drove her deep into the forest. He raped her and killed her, then buried her body nearby. He went back to Monique, boasting of his latest victim. Police thought she had run away, but her mother held on to the hope that she was still alive. In March 2002, 10 months later, her remains were found in Belgium. A walker had come across the skull and personal effects in the woods, which Mananya's mother was able to identify. During a press conference, she was overcome with emotion. Her partner spoke on her behalf, describing the time between their daughter's disappearance and discovery as 10 months of hell. Now another hell begins, he said, with a question that haunts us. Who could have committed such an atrocity? There were fears that there was a serial killer on the loose, someone who is abducting young girls. The police had made a connection between Céline Saison and Mananya Tumpong, but they had nothing else to go on. There was no CCTV, no cell phones, no GPS. Plus, it was Michel's first known murder in 10 years, so he had that huge 10-year gap. Whether he killed people in those 10 years, we don't know.
Do we know why there was a 10-year gap?
No idea.
Could he have been in prison?
No.
Ah.
He was in the community still, but we'll touch on that in part 2.
Okay.
Francis Nachbar explained that the concept of serial killers is a complex issue in France. In the early 2000s, it hadn't yet entered the police's sphere of consciousness.
So they didn't have much experience with serial killers back then? Or
I guess so. Yeah, and I guess serial killers weren't, I don't want to say a huge thing. It's not like in America where you have loads. And obviously in the 80s and 90s, when the other two criminals were suspects, so Émile Louis and Marc Dutroux, I wonder if police still had a grasp of what a serial killer was at that point. Even though these three individuals seemed to be operating in the same area and they were all going after young women and young girls. But then you also have the fact that Michel had a 10-year gap. Possibly a 10-year gap, we don't know. So, you know, in the 80s and 90s, there were, in a short space of time, there were lots of girls going missing, but there were loads of other girls going missing because of the other criminals.
Mm.
So then they have this 10-year gap. There's no dots to connect at this point. And we have to remember there wasn't a national sex offenders register at this point still.
Yeah. So there was no way of keeping track of these people after they were released from prison.
Yeah, like his previous convictions that he had served prison time for. And like that British superintendent complained after Joanna Parish.
Yeah, there was no media attention.
There was no media attention and they hadn't even connected the dots. Like, look, he got out of prison on this date.
And this happened.
These are happening. But then at the same time, he hadn't murdered anyone by that point.
That we know of.
Yeah. So, yeah, he hadn't been convicted of murder. He had been convicted of paedophilia and rape. Mm. But these were murders happening. So I guess that's why they were also looking at Émile Louis and Marc Dutroux, who had been suspected of murder.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. And he also had the guise of being a married man with a young baby. And because she was involved in the crimes.
Yeah, they thought it was impossible that a woman would want to take part in these acts.
It's different if it was just a man, like Marc and Émile, who were probably acting on their own. Mm. Therefore, they stand out. But because Michel was often seen with his wife, he didn't stick out as a suspect. Mm.
It's very much like Fred and Rose West, isn't it, this case?
Yeah, it's really fucked up.
Yeah, fucked up relationship.
Yeah, it's like they're both complicit in the crimes. She's helping him, but to an outsider, you know, if you see a man and a woman, a couple walking down the road, you're not going to feel as threatened or unsafe as you would if you were approached by a man.
Yeah, especially if they had their baby with them.
Yes, which they really played on, and it's disgusting. So yeah, in part 2, this is a very short episode, and thankfully it is because we've covered a lot of disgusting, horrific crimes. But yeah, in part 2, we will look into the trial and the confessions. We're
going to a new sort of schedule.
Yes.
Not a solid schedule.
No, we're doing things differently this time. So at the beginning, we kind of like bulldozed into the introduction because we're not going to do banter anymore, which we'll get onto. But yeah, we're not going to stick to a schedule as such. We are going to release our episodes case by case as and when they're ready.
Yeah, because we're finding that life is just, you know, carrying on.
Life is lifing.
Yeah. We're having to adult a lot.
Yes, yeah, we are. Which means we can't commit to a fixed schedule. However, we're constantly going to be working on cases, but we're going to release them. We're going to release the episodes when each case has been done, rather than recording a bunch and then releasing
one by one.
Yeah, but part 2 of this episode will be out next week. But then the case after that, which we will talk about next week, we won't have a fixed date. If you follow us on social media, it will make sense. Yeah. We will let you know. But we do have something hopefully exciting to announce.
Yeah, we've set up a Patreon.
Yes, kind of a big deal. But yeah, we've set up a Patreon if you would like to support us, and we will be putting up, not regularly, but as and when, some updates on cases that we've already covered. Done one so far, haven't we?
We've done an update on the Charles Sabrage case.
Yeah, which was our first case in season 1.
And are we mentioning the news?
Yes.
So aside from the updated cases, we're going to be doing a new thing about the news. Crime news.
Yeah, well, no, I think we're going to do a bit of banter. So basically every 2 months, we're going to release Patreon episodes. They're going to be very short.
A bit like we did in our early episodes at the start, where we get like news articles and...
Yeah, so we're going to do a bit of banter on like non-serious crimes. And then we will also briefly touch on current serious crime cases that are happening as and when. So they'll be released every couple of months, starting in January.
Yes.
And yeah, so things to look forward to on our Patreon. We've got the Charles Sabrage update case and our mini Patreon episodes. If you can't commit to the Patreon, feel free to check out our Buy Us a Coffee link, which is on our website and social media as well, if you would like to support us. But if you're already listening, you're already supporting us.
Yeah.
And if you continue to listen, we thank you for your continued support. So yeah, that's that for now. It's a short episode, but we can say see you next Tuesday for this one, because there will be a part 2.
Yeah. So see you next Tuesday, guys.
Thanks for listening. Bye. Thank you for listening to the show. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find more information about the show on our website at feloniouspod.com or on our Instagram at felonious.pod.
Links to our show notes can be found in the episode description, as well as through our website and social media. You can visit our Contact Us page and tell us what you think about the show and if there are any cases you would like us to cover. We hope you join us for the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.